Before going ahead, let's talk about some practical examples of different states of matter. We saw some of the traits that are exhibited by different states of matter, namely solids, liquids, and gases. Let's talk about a rubber band. A rubber band is a solid, yes, it is. Yet, we are able to stretch it easily. If you see the other solids, it changes shape, yet it is a solid. So, how do we explain that? A rubber band is one of the exceptions. When we stretch it, it sort of changes shape when we put in that amount of pressure, and when we remove that pressure of stretching the rubber band, it sort of regains its original shape. So the shape does not really change just because we stretched it, although it temporarily does. And if we put too much of force or too much of pressure on the rubber band, it actually breaks. But inherently, it still is a solid despite this slightly differing property. Talking about, say, a sugar crystal. When a sugar crystal is placed in a jar, it takes the shape of the jar. In other words, it exhibits a liquid-like property wherein it takes the shape of a container. So is a sugar crystal a solid? Absolutely, it is a solid, because inherently its shape remains the same. Irrespective of whether the sugar crystal is in my hand, the sugar crystal is in a plate, or the sugar crystal is in a jar. So when lots of sugar crystals are put together in a jar, it takes the shape of a jar. But just because it exhibits a slightly liquid-like property, that does not make it a solid, because it inherently has a fixed shape, and that remains the same irrespective of the surface or irrespective of the place where the sugar crystal is kept. Talking about a sponge. I just spoke a little while ago about a sponge, or about a solid having the lowest possible compressibility. So a sponge, despite being a solid, what is it that why is it that it still exhibits compressibility? When a sponge essentially has minute holes with air trapped in it. So when we press a sponge, that air is expelled out, and hence we are able to compress it. I repeat, a sponge essentially has minute or small holes within it, which has some amount of air trapped in it. So when I press the sponge, or when we press the sponge, the air is expelled out of it, and hence the sponge exhibits compressibility. These days, petrol and diesel are extremely polluting options. And hence we are using cleaner sources of energy like CNG, compressed natural gases. CNG is used as a fuel these days because of the extremely high compressibility of the gas. It can be easily stored in a cylinder and transported, sometimes even over long distances. Sometimes we are sitting far away from the kitchen, and still the smell of the hot food reaches us. Why is that so? Essentially, the particles which give the aroma or the smell to the hot food mix with the particles of air, which as a gaseous mixture come closer to us, and thereby we are able to smell hot food. Contrast this with cold food. Because of its much lower temperatures, there are no gaseous particles particularly being emitted out of it, and hence you have to go much closer to smell it, so to speak.